It started with a glitch, not a dramatic explosion or grand betrayal, just a single misread signal, a flicker of static in the comm array. Nobody on the USS Warden thought much of it at the time. The fleet was moving into position around the Vega line, ready to flank the Gralt Dominion. The plan was tight, refined over months of desperate strategy meetings and sleepless simulations, a perfect dance of firepower, timing, and diplomacy. Then came the glitch. Commander Rutger, 40 years old, battle-scarred and fueled by a lifetime of distrust, sat in the command chair, eyes narrowed at the distorted screen. The data feed showed an incoming Gralt formation breaching the treaty line. According to the system, they were armed and targeting human vessels. "They're pushing the treaty line," said Lieutenant Kenner, voice shaky. "Target locks confirmed." Rutger's jaw clenched. "Confirm it again. That border was sealed by the Treaty of Ashen Rift. They wouldn't dare." Kenner checked twice, 3 times. Same readout. The fleet was massive. 6 dreadnoughts, 12 cruisers, countless drone swarms. Humanity's last ace. They'd put everything into this armada, gambling their survival on one sharp-edged response. They were outnumbered in the long game, diplomatically isolated. The only way they'd ever win was by never letting it get that far. So when the glitch told them the Gralt were attacking, Rutger gave the order. "Fire." That word, one syllable, would erase entire civilizations. Back at Earth Command, 10 minutes later, the truth came in. The signal distortion was a software update lag, some legacy Earth tech trying to sync with Gralt neural protocol. The target locks were automated scans. They weren't hostile. They were just watching. But by then it didn't matter. The Warden's cannons had already screamed across the void. Fusion lances tore through the Gralt line like knives through skin. Dreadnoughts launched kinetics that split moons. The humans didn't hesitate. For too long, they'd been called impulsive, violent, primitive. That day, they lived up to the worst of those names. Because when the Gralt realized what was happening, they fought back. Not just that line, all of them. Every outpost, every colony, every hidden fleet waiting in dark space. The Galactic Council tried to intervene. It didn't work. No one could stop it now. And the worst part? Rutger didn't call it back. Not even when he knew. Not when the corrected feed came through. Not when Kenner whispered, "Sir, it was a glitch. They weren't attacking." Rutger's stare didn't break. "They were going to. Maybe not today, but someday. We just beat them to it." He said it like a truth he'd carried for decades. Maybe he had. Maybe all of them had. Because Earth didn't trust the galaxy anymore. Not after Mars. Not after the siege of Delcor, when humans were left to die in orbit while their allies negotiated. Not after the trade embargoes. The forced sterilizations. The years of being treated like a viral species, barely sentient, barely tolerated. So when Rutger gave the order, it wasn't a mistake. It was revenge with a trigger. And the galaxy never saw it coming. Humanity had always been good at breaking things. But this time, they'd broken something no one could rebuild. A single order. A single battle. And the ruin that followed would stretch across systems. Planets would burn. Treaties would collapse. The council would fall. Entire species would vanish. And in the middle of the chaos, the human fleet didn't stop. They advanced, because one error had started it all. And now? Now it was war without forgiveness. The first screams didn't come from the battlefield. They came from the deep space channels, diplomatic frequencies, high-priority codes, screaming in languages both alien and human, Gralt ambassadors, council mediators, even Earth's own representatives, still clinging to the dying belief that this could be contained, that it was a misunderstanding, a glitch, but there was no stopping what had already been unleashed. The human fleet wasn't made to respond. It was made to conquer. After Mars, Earth stopped pretending it belonged in the galaxy. The other species never forgot how quickly humans escalated, and Earth never forgot how quickly they were abandoned when the fires came. So when Rutger's order shattered the treaty line, the fleet didn't fall back. It expanded. The USS Warden, still radiating the heat of its kills, turned toward the nearest Gralt colony, a world called Cetrel 9. Population, 900,000. Mostly civilians, mostly unarmed, mostly irrelevant. They called it a preventive strike. High above Cetrel 9, the Gralt defense grid sent out a desperate signal. Not a declaration of war, a plea for clarity. Were the humans confused? Did they realize who they were targeting? They were met with silence. And then came fire. Warden's heavy-class railguns tore open the upper atmosphere. Kinetic rods slammed down into the crust like spears thrown by gods. Towers collapsed. Cities folded in on themselves. Whatever defense systems the Gralt had were outdated, ceremonial. Cetrel was a border colony. It was never meant to be a battlefield. It was a message outpost, a trade center, a beacon of peaceful outreach from a species that never truly wanted to understand Earth. Now it was ash. Rutger didn't watch the destruction. He didn't need to. He stood on the command deck with his hands behind his back, face unreadable. Around him, the crew performed their duties with military precision. There was no cheering, no celebration, just silence. Until Kenner finally said it. "They're calling this genocide, sir." Rutger didn't even flinch. "They'll call it worse before this ends." "You knew the signal was a glitch," Kenner said quietly, his voice not accusatory but haunted. "You let us believe we were under attack." "No," Rutger said. "I let them believe it." He turned then, eyes locking on Kenner's. "You've seen what they do when they don't fear us. You've seen the embargoes, the blockades, the peacekeeping initiatives they use to cripple our colonies. The only time they respect us is when we bleed them first. But Cetrel was a civilian colony. So was Mars." Kenner didn't argue. He couldn't. He was there, 10 years ago, orbiting Mars as it burned. He'd watched Gralt cruisers hover in silent neutrality while Earth's people suffocated, bombarded by mercenary fleets the Council never condemned. That memory lived in every human officer. "Still," Kenner said, "we're making enemies we can't afford." Rutger gave a hollow laugh. "We were already surrounded. At least now, we're the enemy they fear." On the third day, the galaxy responded. Not with diplomacy. With fire. The Volari Sovereign, the second largest species in the Council, declared open war. Their fleets entered human-controlled space through the Oberon Rift, unleashing drone carriers and graviton storms. One human colony was wiped out in 30 minutes, thousands dead. Entire families vaporized. The message was clear. The galaxy would not tolerate this madness. Earth's reply was simpler. "We are done tolerating you." And so the human fleet split. The Warden remained the command ship, flanked by a brutal ring of warhawks, the Krakens, a battle group known for glassing colonies. The Arbiters, ex-UN elite soldiers turned off-the-books mercs, now recommissioned as Black Ops hit squads, and the Haulers, who did the dirtiest job of all, harvested what was left behind. They didn't just destroy. They took weapons, technology data. Sometimes people. It wasn't honorable. It wasn't clean. But Earth didn't care about honor anymore. Back on Earth, riots spread. The public had seen the footage, the burned colonies, the truth about the glitch. But something darker crept in through that revelation. Agreement, a quiet rage, grief weaponized into fury, Most humans didn't want peace anymore. They wanted vengeance. "Let the stars burn," one protest sign read. They never wanted us anyway. EarthGov, trapped between diplomatic shame and military command, issued no apologies. They couldn't. Apologies were weakness, and weakness got you embargoed. Or erased. So instead, they unleashed Operation Pale Dagger, a galaxy-wide strike campaign against council infrastructure, trade hubs, refueling stations, communication relays. If it fed the system that kept humans beneath alien boots, it became a target. And Earth's best were very, very good at destroying systems. In the outer belt of the Creighton Verge, the Council gathered. 12 species, 12 voices, all screaming. "They've declared total war. Rutger must be tried for crimes against sentience. Where is the human delegate?" Gone. They pulled him before the assault. "This isn't war, it's madness." Some argued for restraint, sanctions, others for annihilation. But none of it mattered. Earth wasn't listening. Humanity had closed its ears to compromise. And now, they were showing the galaxy exactly why they should have never been underestimated. The Council called it a tantrum, but the dead planets piling up told another story. Meanwhile, on the Warden, Rutger reviewed intel on Valari Prime, a Council capital world. "Civilians," Kenner said. His voice cracked from too many nights without sleep. "Billions. If we hit that planet, it's no longer war, it's extinction." Rutger didn't look up. "You're assuming we want them to survive." Kenner stepped closer, hands trembling. "This isn't justice anymore. This is extermination." Rutger finally looked at him. "They were never going to let us in. We built ships to reach the stars, and they called us vermin. We asked for seats at their table, and they handed us collars. No more." "I didn't sign up for genocide," Kenner said. Rutger's face hardened. "You signed up to protect Earth. This is what it takes." There was a long silence. Kenner stepped back, eyes full of something close to horror. Rutger didn't stop him. He didn't have time to explain that some wars weren't about winning. Some were about never kneeling again. Then came the worst moment. The Children of Istara, a peaceful alien sect known for rescuing human refugees during the Delcor crisis, broadcasted a plea across every channel. "Stop, please. We sheltered your children. We defended your wounded. Don't make us suffer for others' sins." It was broadcast on loop for 5 hours. Rutger watched it once, then turned it off, and gave the coordinates to the Krakens. What followed would be remembered in history, if anyone was left to record it. The Astara sanctuaries burned for 3 days. Not a single retaliatory weapon fired. The children, the elders, the healers, all gone. Not because they were enemies, but because they were the best of the galaxy. And Earth wanted to make it clear, even your goodness can't protect you anymore. By week 2, the war had spread to 100 systems, black holes filled with debris, solar systems drowned in radiation storms, dead moons turned into war factories. Humans didn't build empires. They built scars. The Galactic Council was crumbling. Species turned on each other in panic. Treaties shattered. Trade routes closed. A 1,000-year order fell apart in days. And Earth, scarred, angry, and fed up, rose from the chaos like a force of nature. Not a leader, not a tyrant, just a race that finally stopped asking for a seat at the table and burned the table down instead. Back on the Warden, Rutger stood at the observation deck, staring into the swirling red storms of a dying gas giant. A graveyard floated in its rings, Valari ships torn in half, drifting like corpses in a black sea. He felt no pride, no thrill, just silence. "You know what they'll call us?" Kenner said behind him. Rutger nodded slowly. Monsters. Kenner's voice cracked. And what are we? Rutger looked out into the stars. Alone, he whispered. But finally, standing. The funeral was held in silence. Not for the Gralt, not for the Valari, not for the billions vaporized in the first wave of humanity's vengeance. This was for one of their own. Lieutenant Thorne, a 26-year-old engineer from Luna Base, was found in his quarters with a pistol in his mouth and a half-finished note on his bunk. It simply read, "I didn't come out here to kill children." The crew didn't speak about it. There were no formal honors. Rutger had banned funerals weeks ago, after the first cluster of suicides spread through the lower decks like a contagion. He said grief made them weak. Said the only thing that mattered now was discipline. But people whispered. Even on a warship as hardened as the Warden, ghosts began to pile up. Empty stares, long silences in the mess halls, quick glances during mission briefings. Nobody said the words, but they all thought them. What are we becoming? Out in the Sarin Belt, the humans were winning. System after system fell. Council routes were scorched. Refueling depots detonated. Outposts erased. But victory didn't look like banners and cheering. It looked like smoldering planets, like hollowed-out moons turned into fuel dumps, like AI-run prisons holding alien POWs who had never even fired a shot. The humans didn't stop. Because they couldn't. Earth couldn't afford mercy anymore. Mercy had nearly cost them extinction. Rutger stood by that logic like a shield. Every decision was calculated, cold, and final. He read loss reports like accounting figures. Every alien death tallied like a checkmark against centuries of humiliation. Every shattered station one less place for humanity to be betrayed. He didn't eat with the crew. He didn't sleep in rotation. He spent most of his time alone, studying new targets, running simulations of the war's spread. But he wasn't blind to what it was doing to them. Kenner barely spoke now. The man who once pushed back, questioned orders, tried to hold on to morality. He was becoming hollow, not obedient, just quiet. Number. And worse, others were beginning to follow him down that same path. Rutger had seen it in a 1,000-yard stare before. In wars long past, men who had nothing left inside but motion, who would follow any order just to delay having to feel. This war wasn't forging warriors. It was carving out the last of their humanity. Then came the Council's last stand. The fractured, desperate species met in orbit above Val Atros, an artificial satellite the size of a small moon, neutral ground, protected by war treaties no one cared about anymore. They had no choice. The humans were too fast, too ruthless, too united. They didn't fight like an empire. They fought like a cornered animal with nothing to lose, and that made them unstoppable. The remaining powers, Valari, Drozen, Lekta, and 3 others, proposed the final protocol, a mass weapons strike on Earth itself, not to conquer, to erase. Rutger intercepted the chatter before it even hit the Alliance networks. He stared at the decoded message, then turned to his war staff. "Pull up our asset list," he said. "Every off-grid agent, every sleeper cell we planted before Mars. Activate them." "You think they'll hit Earth?" Kenner asked, his voice sharp for the first time in days. "I know they will," Rutger said. And just like that, Phase 2 began. Earth had changed since the war began. Cities had gone underground, civilian manufacturing centers were converted to orbital defense relays, education systems were replaced with military readiness programs. Children under 10 learned how to pilot drones. Teenagers were drafted into encryption cells. There were no more celebrities. No more elections. Earth was now a planet with one purpose: survival through domination. So when Rutger's message hit command, 5 words only. They're coming. Prepare to burn. Earth didn't panic. It hardened. The final protocol launched with terrifying precision. 6 alien fleets, cloaked in stealth, broke into Sol space through a gravitational slingshot off Saturn's 3rd moon. The plan was brutal. Swarm the atmosphere with antimatter pulses, force Earth's defense grid to collapse, and then level the surface in coordinated impact waves. What they didn't expect was that Earth had become a trap. The attackers didn't even make it past Mars. The first to fall were the Lecta. Their ship ruptured mid-cloak when it passed through the dustline mesh, a net of weaponized nanoash surrounding the planet like a death cloud. Then came the Drozen, crippled by what they thought was interference, only to realize it was a virus seeded into their navigation arrays 20 years ago, when humanity still pretended to be weak. The rest? Obliterated in the most brutal orbital dogfight ever recorded. It wasn't even a battle. It was slaughter. Earth sent no prisoners, no messages, just wreckage. Rutger watched the live feed aboard the Warden. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. Not with joy, with grim satisfaction. "They tried to wipe us out," Kenner said, his voice flat. "And now they never will," Rutger replied. Kenner didn't answer. But something behind his eyes shifted. A thought he hadn't dared let surface before. If this is winning, why does it feel like we're already dead? Back in Council space, panic turned to chaos. The Valari homeworld, next on the fleet's list, sent out a plea for a ceasefire. Not from strength, from desperation. They were willing to hand over Council secrets, surrender resource worlds, even offer reparations. Earth didn't respond. Instead, Rutger sent back one sentence: "We no longer speak peace with cowards." And the fleet moved in. The siege of Valari Prime became a broadcast, not from the aliens, but from the humans. Every strike, every explosion, every screaming evac route, all sent live across the galaxy by human propaganda ships hovering like vultures. "We want them to watch," Rutger said to his war staff. "We want every species to know this is what happens when you put your foot on Earth's neck and expect us to beg." The broadcasts went viral. Millions watched as their former galactic capital collapsed. The Council shut down its remaining communication nodes. By then, it didn't matter. There was no Council anymore, only the fleet. In the darkness of the Warden, Kenner sat alone in his quarters, watching an old Earth video on a loop. A home movie, his brother, his mother, a beach, laughter, sand, sunlight. He hadn't seen Earth in years. He didn't know what would be left of it when this was all over. Because he knew now. Rutger wasn't going to stop. Not until every last alien empire was broken, begging, or buried. And maybe not even then. He thought of Thorn, of the other suicides, of Sichtrel's burning cities and Astara's silent orphans. He thought of the things he used to believe in. Peace, order, honor, all gone, replaced by one truth. You win or you burn, and Earth had chosen to win, no matter the cost. The halls of the USS Warden felt colder now, not because of a systems failure or environmental controls. They were perfect as ever. It was the silence. The weight of absence, of people once present now gone, either to war or to whatever dark place the soul retreats to when it can't make sense of its own actions. The suicide rate had tripled in 2 weeks. The brass didn't speak of it. The official logs listed them as non-combat losses. But everyone aboard the ship knew what they really were: casualties of guilt. Even Kenner, once the moral voice of the command deck, now walked like a ghost in uniform. His boots hit the ground with mechanical rhythm, his eyes always distant. He was still respected, still obeyed. But nobody asked him what he thought anymore, because deep down, they knew what he'd say if he dared speak honestly. "We've gone too far." And once that truth took root, it was hard to ignore everything else unraveling around them. The Warden's next target was Irith's Gate, a megastructure used to control wormhole routes across 9 sectors, strategically critical, politically sacred. It was also defended by the FATAL, a reptilian species that had stayed mostly neutral in the conflict. Neutrality no longer existed in Rutger's universe. "Wipe it out," he ordered, "and kill the power grid before they evacuate." Kenner blinked. "Sir, the Gate is mostly scientific personnel. They're not soldiers." Rutger didn't flinch. Neither were the Mars colonists. Neither were the kids buried under Citrel. They've benefited from our weakness long enough. Irith's Gate has never launched a weapon in its entire history. "That's the problem," Rutger said coldly. "They never fought with us. Now they'll learn the cost of silence." And just like that, the coordinates were fed into the weapons system, the railguns aligned, the gravitic anchors locked onto the station's core. And the most advanced scientific hub in the quadrant, home to over 100,000 researchers and engineers, was reduced to twisted slag in 6 coordinated volleys. There were no survivors, only scattered debris and dying screams broadcast on open channels. Rutger didn't watch, but Kenner did. All of it. In the following days, a fracture began to grow, not just in Kenner, but across the fleet. Quiet insubordination, missed confirmations, intentional delays. Nobody said it aloud, but more and more officers were resisting the purge from within. Small things at first. Delaying a missile lock long enough for a transport ship to escape, feeding target data that wasn't fully accurate, leaking warnings on secure channels before the fleet arrived. It wasn't rebellion, not yet. But it was something worse in Rutger's eyes. Weakness. He responded swiftly. 4 officers were executed in front of their crews, not airlocked, shot, on deck, point blank. Their blood left on the steel for hours before it was cleared, an open warning. "This isn't a democracy," Rutger said afterward, his voice low and steady. "This is survival. If any of you hesitate again, I will end you myself." The crew didn't argue. But in their eyes, something changed. He was no longer a commander. He was a tyrant. Kenner stood at Thorne's old bunk that night, staring at the photo left behind. A girl, a baby, a family waiting for a father that would never come home. "Was this what we were supposed to fight for?" he muttered. He didn't expect an answer. But from the shadows behind him, a voice replied. "Number, this is what we became when they stopped treating us like people." It was Mira, chief of tactical ops, quiet, razor-sharp, and deeply loyal to Earth. She had never spoken much outside of orders, but lately even she was cracking. Kenner turned slowly. "You still believe we're right?" Mira didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "I don't know what right means anymore. I just know we can't stop. Not now." "Why not?" "Because the second we stop," she said, stepping closer, "we'll have to live with what we did. And I don't think any of us can survive that." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Back on Earth, things were worse. The Council's destruction had created a power vacuum, and into that vacuum poured EarthGov's worst elements: private warlords, rogue corporations, Earth-first extremists. They claimed territories the fleet had cleansed, using fear and loyalty tests to establish new regimes. One colony broadcasted a live execution of alien civilians, promising genetic purity for a reborn Earth. The government didn't respond, because it was the government now. What had once been a desperate bid for survival had mutated into a doctrine of absolute supremacy. And there were whispers, Rumors that someone in the upper command was planning to turn on Rutger. He had become too visible, too powerful, too dangerous. Earth had never intended to let one man become the face of the war. But they couldn't stop him now. He wasn't just leading the fleet. He was the fleet. Then came the Serenio broadcast. A young girl, no older than 9, face streaked with ash, stared into a shaky camera. Her voice trembled. She didn't beg. She just asked, "Why do the humans hate us? We didn't do anything. We gave food to their people. We played with their children. Why are they killing us?" It wasn't propaganda. It wasn't manufactured. It was raw, unfiltered pain. And it broke something inside millions. Across the galaxy, even on Earth, people watched that footage in silence. On the Warden, it played once before the signal was scrambled. Rutger didn't comment, but Kenner saw his jaw tighten, saw the briefest flicker in his eyes. It was gone, a second later. But it was there. Doubt. The Warden's next destination was Selka Hive, an insectoid world that had once been an Earth ally. The humans claimed they had stockpiled weapons, harbored fugitives, the usual reasons. In truth, the Tselka had refused to surrender their AI archives, so they were marked for destruction. Mira stood with Kenner outside the war room, watching the final strike orders load into the system. "Are we going to stop this?" she asked. Kenner didn't answer immediately, but this time he wasn't quiet out of fear. He was calculating. If we go against him, we die. If we follow orders, we lose what little is left of us. The only way to stop this— He trailed off. Mira finished for him. "Is to remove Rutger." They didn't say assassination. They didn't have to. The war had changed them all. Turned soldiers into butchers, leaders into tyrants, loyalty into silence. And now it would turn men like Kenner into something darker, the ones who would kill their own to save what was left. They didn't meet in secret. Not really. There was no locked room or whisper-filled corner of the Warden. No encrypted messages or tapped sub-frequencies. Just a maintenance deck. Abandoned, quiet, near the old venting systems, where people passed through without question. And there, in the cold hum of the ship's forgotten corridors, the first talk of betrayal bloomed. Kenner stood with Mira, arms folded tight, face hard. 3 others joined them: Wells, engineering chief, Dre, ship navigator, and Oswin, a young officer who once believed Rutger would lead humanity into glory. None of them looked proud. All of them looked like they hadn't slept in days. Kenner spoke first. "If we do this, we don't get to go back. Not to Earth, not to command, not even to the war." Dre shifted, his voice dry. "There's nothing to go back to." Mira nodded. "We've all seen it. He's not stopping. He doesn't know how. The war's become personal. The galaxy's already in ashes. And he's still lighting matches." "Rutger saved us," Oswin said quietly, almost like he didn't want to believe the words. "He gave Earth a chance when everyone else just watched us die." Kenner didn't argue. Because it was true. Rutger had saved them. At first, he was the reason they weren't slaves to the Council, weren't begging for aid from species that saw them as animals. He was the blade that cut the leash. But now that blade was turning on anything that breathed. Wells broke the silence. "So what's the plan? Shoot him in his chair? Airlock him during a systems check?" "No," Kenner said. "Too loud. Too messy. He's paranoid, always armed. And he's got eyes everywhere." "So what then?" Dre asked. "We bleed the command structure first, quietly, cut him off. Make the ship think he's losing control. Let the doubt spread. And then," Kenner's voice dropped, "we finish it ourselves." The first step was data manipulation. Wells began feeding false metrics into the Warden's targeting algorithms. Missed shots, glitched missile paths, AI targeting errors that made it look like the ship's systems were beginning to fail. It wasn't enough to raise alarms, but it was enough to make people talk. Within 3 days, rumors spread across the lower decks that the Warden was aging, overextended, that maybe Rutger's relentless campaign was beginning to push the fleet beyond its limits. The second step was leaking the numbers. Mira used her access in tactical ops to quietly release casualty stats, real ones, to the ship's enlisted crew. Numbers that EarthGov had buried, civilians killed, medical ships vaporized, surrendering colonies torched, atrocities Rutger had buried under military necessity. By the end of the week, morale was cracking like thin ice. People started looking at each other differently, not as soldiers in a righteous war, but as participants in something they no longer understood. Rutger, for all his precision, wasn't blind. He noticed the shift: less chatter on the bridge, fewer salutes, more silence in the mess halls, a tension he couldn't explain away. He summoned Kenner to his quarters. The room was colder than usual, lights dimmed. The walls were lined with war maps, planetary readouts, and data streams running 24/7. It looked less like a captain's quarters, and more like the lair of someone who had stopped pretending he was human. Rutger stood by the window, staring out into the dark swirl of a nearby gas giant. He didn't turn when Kenner entered. "I hear whispers," Rutger said quietly. "About me, about the war. Do you know anything about that?" Kenner stayed still. "Rumors spread fast in long campaigns. I don't want rumors, I want soldiers." Kenner didn't flinch. "Then maybe stop asking them to slaughter civilians." Rutger turned slowly, his expression unreadable. There was a silence between them, long, heavy. "You're not the same man who signed on," Rutger said. Kenner met his eyes. "Neither are you." For a moment, Rutger didn't respond. Then he stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "I built this fleet out of ashes. I turned a dying species into a force the galaxy fears. You think that happens without sacrifice?" "You turned us into monsters," Kenner said, voice steady. Rutger didn't blink. "Number I showed you the monster we already were." That night, 3 more officers joined the cause. They didn't pledge anything out loud. They didn't need to. It was in their silence, in their eyes, in the way they stood in the dark and listened without stopping the words. The plan took form fast. Wells would isolate life support in Rutger's command room during a routine systems test, mask the shutdown as a micro-leak alert. Mira would reroute internal surveillance feeds to a looped recording from the prior shift. Kenner would be the one to walk in and end it. Clean. No struggle. Just one shot. Then, they'd blame it on a Gralt infiltrator. Forge a comm trail, plant fragments of alien tech on Rutger's body, lock down the narrative. By the time Earth Command received the report, they'd be too busy scrambling for power to stop what had already been done. It was desperate. It was treason. It was also the only way to stop the madness. But when the time came, something went wrong. Wells was found dead in the reactor shaft. Crushed. Official report said mechanical failure during a diagnostic check. Kenner didn't buy it. Not for a second. That's when he realized what they had underestimated most. Rutger didn't need surveillance. He knew them. All of them. Their habits, their fears, their movements. He'd built this fleet like a sculptor carving stone. Every soldier, every officer, every flaw, every crack. He knew who would break before they even did. The next morning, Mira disappeared. Her comm ID was shut off. Her room wiped clean. Kenner didn't ask where she went, because deep down he already knew. Rutger called an emergency briefing. The command deck filled with silent faces, most too tired or afraid to meet his gaze. He stood before them not as a leader, but as a man daring anyone to challenge him. I know some of you think I've lost control, he said, voice calm. I haven't. I've never been more focused. He paced slowly. They called us savages, laughed while we begged, let us burn on Mars, sold our future to the highest bidder, and now we've taken it back. His eyes swept across the deck. And now that it's hard, you want to stop? Silence. I won't let you. He stepped closer to the crew. I will burn every world that ever spat on us. I will erase every council record of our inferiority. I will drag humanity to the top, or I will die with my hands around the galaxy's throat. No one spoke. Not even Kenner. Because in that moment, everyone understood. Rutger was no longer fighting a war. He was the war, and to stop him, they'd have to do more than kill a man. They'd have to break the monster they helped create. After the briefing, Kenner stood alone in the observation chamber, staring into the starless void. The warden was en route to Zelion, one of the last species left unburned. They had offered Earth a full surrender. Unconditional. No tricks, no weapons, no pride. Rutger planned to erase them anyway. And now Kenner faced a choice. Either finish the job or finish him. The silence in the command deck was suffocating. The stars outside the viewport drifted past, cold and uncaring, as the warden glided toward its next target. Zelion. A water-rich planet, home to a species known for diplomacy, art, and neutrality. The Zelians had never raised a weapon in their long existence. They had nothing left to bargain with, and they knew it. So they surrendered. Openly. Publicly. In a broadcast filled with dignity and grief, the Zelian queen stood before the galaxy, laid down her crown, and said, "We will not resist. We only ask that our children be spared." The broadcast made its way across all frequencies. Every officer on the warden saw it. So did Rutger. He watched it once, then turned it off without a word. "Bring us in," he said, eyes unreadable. "Full strike capacity." No one moved at first. Then the order filtered through like poison. Systems activated, missiles loaded, the strike path plotted. And Kenner knew, right then, this was the line. This wasn't war. This was execution. He moved quickly, took the service lifts to Deck 5, slipped through maintenance tunnels. Every footstep echoed like thunder in his chest. He didn't know if anyone was watching. If Rutger had already predicted this final act of defiance, maybe he had. Maybe that didn't matter anymore. Kenner reached the armory and keyed in his personal code. The AI hesitated, processing, questioning. Then the door hissed open. He took a standard-issue pulse pistol and an EMP dagger. No armor, no helmet. He didn't plan on walking out of this alive. He moved through the corridors with a strange clarity. Everything around him, the flashing red status lights, the vibration of the engines, the distant murmur of terrified whispers. It all seemed muted. All he could hear was Rutger's voice, over and over, echoing from the last briefing. "I will drag humanity to the top, or die with my hands around the galaxy's throat." Kenner had believed in him once. Now he was going to kill him. The command chamber was locked. 2 guards at the door. No more Mira to reroute security. No wells to trigger a systems failure. Kenner didn't bother hiding. He walked straight up to them. They recognized him instantly. "Commander Kenner." He moved before the sentence finished. A quick strike to the first one's throat. The second barely had time to raise his weapon before Kenner slammed the EMP blade through his visor. Both dropped, twitching. He keyed in Rutger's override code, one he'd memorized months ago but never dared use. The door opened. Inside, Rutger stood alone, staring out the wide viewport as the blue-green orb of Zelion grew larger. "You came," Rutger said calmly. Kenner raised the pistol. "I have to stop you." "I know." No anger, no surprise, just resignation. As if Rutger had known this would come from the beginning. I thought Mira would do it, Rutger continued. Or Wells. But you make more sense. Kenner's hand tightened on the grip. You were supposed to protect us. I did. You were supposed to free us. I did that too. You're not a leader anymore, Kenner said, voice cracking. You're a disease, and I can't let you spread. Rutger turned finally. His face wasn't mad. Or sad. It was tired. He stepped forward slowly, hands at his sides. You think killing me will stop this war? Kenner didn't answer. You think Earth will pull back? Rutger asked. That this blood will wash off just because the man who spilled it is gone? Still no answer. Rutger stepped closer. You're not killing me to save the galaxy. You're doing it because you want to believe this still means something. Kenner blinked. His hand trembled. Rutger kept walking. Go ahead, pull the trigger, but know this. There's no one waiting for you back home. Earth doesn't need heroes anymore, just survivors. Kenner's jaw tightened. I'd rather die a man than live as your shadow. The pistol fired. One shot, center mass. Rutger staggered, coughed, and collapsed to his knees. Kenner moved in, gun raised, but Rutger laughed. A wet, coughing rasp full of blood. You think this ends with me? He gasped. I hope so. Rutger smiled as his body slumped against the floor. His last words were barely audible. They'll come for you next. The bridge was chaos. Kenner walked in covered in blood, gun still drawn. Every officer turned to face him, some reaching for weapons, others frozen in shock. He's dead, Kenner announced. Rutger is dead. Silence, then murmurs. Oswin was the first to step forward. Who gave you the right? Kenner didn't hesitate. We all did, when we started lying to ourselves about what this war had become. He was leading us to victory, at the cost of everything human inside us. Another officer shouted. He was the only reason Earth survived. Kenner looked around. This isn't survival. This is butchery. You all know it. Every target we hit, every planet we torch. This isn't war anymore. It's annihilation. Someone else. So what now? Kenner exhaled slowly. We finish the mission, but we change how we fight. He made the announcement fleet-wide within the hour. This is Commander Kenner. Effective immediately, command of the Warden and all attached vessels is transferred to me. Commander Rutger is dead, killed by my hand. There was no applause, no cheers, just silence. Then, the war isn't over. But the way we wage it is. Any further targets must be confirmed hostile. Civilian strikes are suspended. Surrendering worlds are to be spared. We will not become the monsters they said we were. Some accepted it, some refused. 4 destroyer captains disconnected from the fleet, took their ships and vanished into deep space. Others swore vengeance for Rutger. But most were just tired. Tired of the killing. Tired of justifying the unjustifiable. Tired of pretending the war made sense. Kenner didn't expect to save everyone. He just wanted to stop the bleeding. The first test came 3 days later. A Zellian cruiser approached under white flag. Aboard, the Queen herself. Kenner met her in the docking bay. She stepped off the transport slowly, tall, serene, silver-scaled, her long arms folded in grief. You spared us, she said. Kenner nodded. We surrendered, but your previous commander would have destroyed us anyway. I know. Why didn't you? Kenner stared at her for a long time, then said simply, Because I couldn't live with it. The Queen bowed her head. I wish you had come sooner. Back on the bridge, Kenner watched the stars slip by. He felt older. He felt everything. Rutger's body had been spaced with no ceremony, his name stricken from the fleet's official records. But his legacy couldn't be deleted. Planets still burned because of him. Species still hated humanity. And the galaxy would never forget the war that turned one error into extinction-level fire. Kenner wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just trying to keep humanity from losing what little soul it had left. And maybe that was enough. Maybe not. But it had to start somewhere. The first message from Earth came 72 hours after Kenner took command. It was brief, coded, brutal. Ret Auth violation. Stand down or be replaced. Retired authority violation. The highest military offense, one reserved for mutiny, treason, or the assassination of a commanding officer. EarthGov hadn't sent an inquiry, or a review board, or even a question. They'd already made their decision. Kenner stared at the transmission alone in his quarters, eyes burning, jaw tight. He didn't respond immediately. There was nothing to say that would change what had already happened. He had put a bullet in Rutger's chest. The man they built statues for. The man Earth treated like a war god. And now they wanted to remove him. Not for the act itself, but for the reason behind it. Mercy. The fleet was splintered. Some ships followed Kenner without question. Loyalists who had grown weary of Rutger's fire and blood doctrine. Others were uncertain, their captains debating whether to return to Earth and align with new command. And a dangerous few? They stayed just long enough to gather intel, then vanished. Mira would have helped him navigate that. But Mira was gone, either dead or in the hands of someone who'd made sure she'd disappeared before the mutiny had even started. Oswin was still there, though. The young officer stood across the command deck with bloodshot eyes and a twisted kind of silence hanging around him. "I read the message," he said without being asked. "You going to step down?" Kenner didn't look at him. "I didn't kill Rutger to hand this back to men who think the war is a game." Oswin nodded slowly. Then, "So they'll send someone." Kenner turned toward him now. "They already have." Oswin's lips parted, but no words came out, because just then, another alert pinged across the fleet. Unregistered vessel approaching from Soul Jump Vector. Not Council, not alien, human. And worse, one of EarthGov's own black fleet carriers. Designation, ESS Vindication. The Vindication was a floating myth. A ghost ship whispered about by officers who knew better than to ask questions. It didn't respond to normal channels. It didn't follow standard protocols. And it never appeared unless something needed to be erased. Quietly, permanently. The moment the ID came through, Kenner felt it in his bones. Earth wasn't sending a replacement. They were sending a cleaner. The transmission that followed was clear, clipped, and spoken with surgical calm. "Commander Kenner, this is Director Wren, acting authority over fleet stabilization. Stand down. You are under military arrest. If you resist, you will be purged." Kenner didn't reply, not with words. Instead, he ordered the fleet to scatter. "Break formation," he barked across the Warden's command deck. "Send pre-planned vector paths to all ships. Phase Gray, emergency protocol." "What the hell is Phase Gray?" Oswin asked. Kenner's eyes stayed on the holoscreen. "It's what we were told never to use." Across the stars, the once tight human fleet burst apart in coordinated fragments. Some ships jumped immediately, their warp drives flaring to life. Others went dark, cutting all external signals and slipping into the asteroid fields of nearby systems. The Vindication didn't move. It didn't need to. It just waited and watched. The Warden didn't jump. Kenner stayed behind, knowing what that meant. He wasn't running. Not yet. Not before saying something Earth needed to hear. He opened a wideband channel, against orders, against security protocol, and against every rule he'd followed since enlisting. "This is Commander Kenner, formerly of the Human Strike Fleet under the late Commander Rutger. To EarthGov, To what remains of the Council, and to anyone still listening in this burning galaxy, listen carefully. This war started with a mistake, a single glitch, but the slaughter that followed wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. It was policy. It was vengeance dressed up as survival. We became what they said we were. Savages. Monsters. But it's not too late to stop it. I killed Rutger because I believed Earth could still come back from the edge. If that makes me a traitor, so be it. I'd rather die as a traitor than live as another cog in your machine of endless war. Then he closed the channel and waited. The reply came from Director Wren herself, and her voice was chilling in its indifference. Commander Kenner, your emotional outburst has been archived. Your failure to follow restoration doctrine confirms your detachment from Earth's long-term stability strategy. Your life is now expendable. Goodbye. The Vindication moved. No flare, no threat. Just cold, precise acceleration. Within seconds, it launched 3 Void Lance missiles, weapons designed to phase through normal shielding and detonate inside structural cores. Kenner shouted, "Brace for impact!" The first missile veered off course, intercepted by a countermeasure. The second struck the aft deck. Power dropped instantly. The third didn't detonate. Instead, it opened, unfolded, released something, a boarding capsule. They weren't here to kill him. Not yet. They were here to take him alive. Oswin caught him just as the lights flickered. "We need to evacuate now!" Kenner grabbed his pulse rifle and nodded. "We take the side corridors. Get to the bay. I'm not going down in chains." They didn't make it far before the first black operatives appeared. Armor-clad soldiers from EarthGov's Classified Enforcement Division, known as the Gravemen. They didn't speak. They didn't warn. They fired. Muzzle flashes lit the corridor. Oswin took a hit to the shoulder, crumpled behind a control panel. Kenner dragged him into a side passage, laid down suppressive fire. "Go," Oswin gasped. "They'll follow you." Kenner shook his head. "I don't leave people behind." "You didn't leave Rutger behind either." Kenner stared at him. Oswin was smiling through blood. "And I didn't think you had that in you." They reached the emergency hangar, where a single stealth shuttle waited, something Mira had secretly prepped before she disappeared. A final ace. As the bulkhead screamed and Gravemen closed in, Kenner keyed the override, loaded Oswin into the rear, and fired up the thrusters. "Where are we going?" Oswin asked, half-conscious. Kenner looked at the star maps. Somewhere unaligned, somewhere forgotten. He needed space. He needed time, because Earth hadn't just tried to erase him. It had shown its true face, and maybe, just maybe, Kenner wasn't the only one who'd seen it. As the warden disappeared behind them in a cloud of engine fire and warning sirens, Kenner looked back one last time. He'd spent years following orders, spent months watching worlds burn, and only now, at the edge of treason and death, did he feel anything close to peace. The war wasn't over. The galaxy was still bleeding. But he had one last fight left in him. Not against aliens, not against monsters, but against the people who taught him to become one. The shuttle drifted through the uncharted outskirts of the narrow reach, a dead sector long abandoned after the collapse of the Saurian rings. Debris fields, hollow moons, rogue magnetic storms. No civilization touched it anymore. Which was exactly why Kenner had come here. The old comm satellite orbited a shattered dwarf planet, barely functional, but still able to bounce a signal if you knew the right encryption chain. Mira had embedded the code before she vanished. Kenner had only found it 2 days ago, buried in the auxiliary logs. Oswin lay unconscious in the back, patched up with field medkits and luck. He had taken 2 rounds in the last firefight and never once complained. Kenner owed him more than he could repay, and now he was about to gamble their lives on a ghost. He punched the code through the ancient terminal and waited. It took 20 minutes. Then the screen lit up. A woman's face filled the feed, worn, scarred, eyes cold. "Mira." "You're alive," she said flatly. Kenner nodded. "You disappeared." "I had to. Rutger was watching everyone. I couldn't stop him and stay on the ship, so I left." "I killed him," Kenner said. "I know." Silence. Then Mira leaned forward. "They're coming for you." "They already did." "I know that too." Kenner exhaled. "We need to end this, all of it. EarthGov, the Black Fleets, the extermination doctrine. We let them turn us into a weapon and now they can't afford to let us live." Mira's lips thinned. "I've been building something. Not a resistance. Not yet. But there are others. Captains, colonists, veterans. People who believed in what we were before Rutger." Kenner leaned closer. "How many?" "Enough to hurt them. Not enough to win." "Then we make them bleed anyway." Mira's eyes narrowed. "This isn't going to be pretty." "I'm done with pretty." Over the next 2 weeks, Kenner and Mira began piecing together what remained of the splintered fleet. 10 ships answered Kenner's call. Only 10, but they were survivors. Ghost crews, deserters, engineers who had watched too much and stayed quiet too long. No fanfare, no ranks, just people who had hit their limit. Each carried scars. Some had blood on their hands they'd never wash off. Others had lost families to both Council betrayals and Rutger's wrath. But they had one thing in common now. They wanted the war to end. And EarthGov wasn't going to let that happen. The ESS Dominion, Earth's new flagship under Director Wren, had entered the Drelkar Pass, a trade-rich corridor lined with neutral alien stations and human colonies. EarthGov claimed they were re-stabilizing the sector, but everyone knew what that really meant. They were purging it, wiping out anyone who wouldn't kneel. Kenner had one shot. He gathered the 10 ships, gave one order. "Hit them where they think they're safe." The ambush happened at the edge of Station Atarax, a Council-era platform repurposed by humans for trade and diplomacy. The Dominion arrived with escorts, 6 cruisers, 2 battleships, 1 command carrier. What they didn't know was that 3 of those escort captains had already turned. Mira had gotten to them first. When the signal dropped, the Dominion's formation crumbled in seconds. Ships turned inward. Turrets reversed. Missile locks switched sides. The fleet never stood a chance. Kenner's flagship, the Talon Ark, dropped out of cloak and pierced the Dominion's flank with 3 railgun bursts. Station Atarax watched in shock as Earth's own fleet tore itself apart. And for once, it wasn't the aliens who were running. It was Earth. But Wren survived. She fled aboard a stealth cruiser, heading for a classified outpost known only by 3 names: Redhold. It was the final node in the Restoration Doctrine, the place where EarthGov planned to rewrite the next century of galactic policy. A fortress buried beneath an iron moon, powered by gravitational harvesters and guarded by old AI tech outlawed by the Council decades ago. Mira tracked it, and Kenner followed. Redhold wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. The moment they dropped out of warp, auto turrets opened fire, defense rings activated, hunter drones swarmed the Talon Ark and its last 2 surviving escorts. One went down in seconds. The other rammed a power conduit and detonated, creating just enough space for Kenner to punch through. He landed on the surface with a drop team of 8, veterans, all of them. No names, no badges, just eyes full of loss and hands shaking with conviction. They fought through corridors choked with darkness, weaponized silence, and walls that bled data. Redhold wasn't made for diplomacy. It was a temple of control, and at its core, Director Wren. She didn't run. She stood in the command throne, unarmed, surrounded by glowing screens. "You think this changes anything?" she said. Kenner didn't reply. "You kill me, Earth installs another. You dismantle Redhold, they build another one deeper. You save a colony, they wipe 10 more in its place." Kenner leveled his weapon. "I don't need to end EarthGov," he said. "I just need the galaxy to see who they really are." Wren smiled. "Then pull the trigger. But know this. Earth doesn't bleed. It burrows." Kenner fired twice. She collapsed in silence. They didn't destroy Redhold. They broadcasted it. Every file, every recording, every document showing EarthGov's plans to enslave half the known galaxy under the guise of stabilization. It spread like wildfire, to former allies, to neutral species, to surviving council records. And for the first time in 20 years, Earth lost something worse than a fleet. It lost control of the story. Kenner vanished after that. Some said he died in the final raid. Others said he changed his name and lived quietly on a backwater colony in what used to be council space. Mira kept the signal alive. Her ships became symbols of rebellion, not to destroy Earth, but to remind people that power has a price. And the fire that began with one mistake, the glitch that led to war, to slaughter, to blood, would be remembered not as a tragedy, but as a warning. Epilogue. Years later, a young cadet on a fringe outpost would study the human wars. He'd ask his instructor one question. Was Kenner a hero or a traitor? And the instructor would pause, then say, he was both. Because sometimes the only way to save your people is to stop them from becoming what they fear the most.